What if the woman everyone was ready to fire was the only person your child would ever trust? You spilled milk on him? Do you have any idea who that is? The manager's voice cracked through the marble hall like a gunshot. Hannah Brooks froze, her hands trembling, her heart pounding, as warm milk slowly dripped down the front of Khalid al-Mansouri's tailored suit. The room fell silent. Dozens of wealthy guests stared in disbelief. Some smirked, others whispered. A poor nanny, standing inches away from one of the most powerful men in the country after ruining his evening? "Get her out, now," someone muttered. But before anyone could touch her, a tiny hand reached out. The baby in Hannah's arms leaned forward and gently pressed his palm against Khalid's face, not afraid, not confused, but as if he recognized him. Khalid didn't move. His expression changed. And for the first time that night, he looked at Hannah, like she wasn't a stranger at all. "Before we go on, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. And don't forget to subscribe, because what happens next, no one in that room was prepared for." Khalid al-Mansouri was not a man people easily forgot. In the world of high finance, his name carried weight, quiet, controlled, and absolute. He was known as the kind of man who could walk into a room full of powerful executives and say nothing, yet still command complete attention. His presence alone was enough to shift the atmosphere. At 39, Khalid had built an empire that stretched far beyond the borders of the United States. His investment firm controlled luxury hotels, medical technology startups, and real estate developments in cities most people only dreamed of visiting. But despite the scale of his wealth, Khalid lived with a level of discipline that bordered on isolation. He didn't attend social gatherings unless there was a strategic reason. He didn't trust easily, and he certainly didn't tolerate mistakes. To most people, Khalid appeared cold, unapproachable, distant, almost mechanical in the way he handled both business and personal matters. But those who worked closely with him knew the truth was more complicated. Khalid had learned, over time, that trust came with a cost. And he had paid that cost before. Years earlier, his life had taken a turn that no amount of money could control. The loss of his wife during a complicated childbirth had left a silence in his world that no success could fill. It was a moment that had reshaped him completely. Since then, everything he did, every decision, every investment, every risk was calculated with one purpose in mind: protecting his son. Ethan al-Mansouri was 3 years old. Small, quiet, and far more observant than most children his age. From the outside, he looked like any other child born into privilege. He had access to the best doctors, the most advanced care, and a home that provided everything a child could possibly need. But behind that surface was something far more fragile. Ethan didn't speak much. He rarely made eye contact with strangers, and he reacted strongly to changes in his environment, especially unfamiliar people. Doctors had offered explanations. Some called it developmental sensitivity. Others suggested trauma linked to early complications after birth. But none of those explanations had truly helped Khalid understand one simple reality. His son didn't trust anyone. Not the specialists, not the caretakers, not even the staff who had worked in the household for years. One by one, nannies had come and gone. Some were highly trained professionals. Others came with glowing recommendations and years of experience. But none of it mattered. Ethan rejected them all. He would cry, withdraw, refuse to eat, refuse to sleep, until they eventually left. That was the pattern, repeated so many times that the household staff had stopped expecting anything different, which was why Hannah Brooks made no sense. She hadn't arrived with impressive credentials. She hadn't been recommended by a high-end agency. And she certainly didn't look like someone who belonged in a multi-million-dollar estate overlooking the California coastline. Hannah was 26 years old. Her clothes were simple. Her posture carried a quiet exhaustion. And there was a softness in her expression that suggested she had spent far too much of her life taking care of other people instead of herself. Before coming to the Al-Mansouri estate, Hannah had been studying to become a nurse. It had been her dream, but life had shifted in ways she couldn't control. Medical bills, unexpected debt, a mother whose health was slowly declining. One by one, the pieces of her future had been pulled away until the only option left was survival. So she worked, whatever job she could find, whenever she could. And when the opportunity to work as a nanny in a wealthy household appeared, she took it, not because she believed she belonged there, but because she needed the income. At first, no one paid much attention to her. The house staff, led by Margaret Doyle, had seen dozens of women come and go. To them, Hannah was just another temporary solution, someone who would last a few days before Ethan rejected her like all the others. Margaret Doyle ran the household with precision. She was in her early 50s, sharp-eyed, perfectly dressed, and deeply committed to maintaining order. Every detail in the estate passed through her approval, and every member of the staff understood her expectations clearly. Efficiency, discretion, and above all, hierarchy. In Margaret's world, everyone had a place, and Hannah's place, in her eyes, was at the very bottom. She didn't say it outright, but her tone made it clear. The way she assigned Hannah the least desirable tasks, the way she corrected her in front of others, the way she watched her, constantly, as if waiting for her to fail. To Margaret, Hannah wasn't a professional. She was a risk, someone who didn't understand the standards required to operate in a household of this level. But despite all of that, something unexpected happened. Ethan didn't reject her. Not on the first day, not on the second, and not in the days that followed. Instead, he watched her, quietly, carefully, as if he was trying to understand something no one else could see. Hannah didn't rush him. She didn't force interaction. She didn't try to win him over with toys or techniques. She simply stayed present, calm, patient, consistent. And slowly, something shifted. Ethan began to respond. First, it was small things. He stopped crying when she entered the room. Then he allowed her to sit beside him. Then he let her hold his hand. And eventually, he let her hold him. It was a change so subtle that most people didn't notice it at first. But Khalid did. He noticed the way Ethan's breathing steadied when Hannah was near. He noticed the way his son's tension eased when she spoke. And most importantly, he noticed that for the first time in months, Ethan slept through the night. It didn't make sense. And that was exactly what made Khalid suspicious. Because in his experience, things that didn't make sense usually came with hidden motives. So he watched, from a distance, without interfering, without drawing attention. He observed the way Hannah moved through the house, the way she treated the staff, the way she spoke to Ethan, not as a patient, not as a responsibility, but as a child who deserved to feel safe. There were no signs of manipulation, no attempts to gain favor, no subtle efforts to position herself closer to power. If anything, Hannah seemed to do the opposite. She avoided attention, stayed out of important areas, spoke only when necessary, as if she understood she didn't belong, and was doing everything she could to avoid reminding anyone of that fact. And yet, despite her efforts to remain invisible, she had become the one person Khalid's son depended on. Which raised a question Khalid couldn't ignore. Why her? Out of everyone who had tried, failed, and left. Why was she the one Ethan chose to trust? And more importantly, what was it about her that Khalid still couldn't see? The Al-Mansouri estate never felt quiet. Even in its most silent moments, there was always movement. Footsteps echoing softly across polished floors, distant voices carried through long corridors, the subtle rhythm of a house that never truly rested. Every detail was managed. Every action had a purpose, and at the center of it all was control. Margaret Doyle made sure of that. She stood in the main hallway that morning, clipboard in hand, her posture straight as she reviewed the final preparations for the evening's event. Her eyes moved quickly, catching the smallest imperfections: the angle of a flower arrangement, the positioning of a chair, the timing of a staff member passing through a doorway. Nothing escaped her. "Those glasses need to be replaced," she said without looking up. "And the silverware is not aligned. Fix it before the guests arrive." "Yes, ma'am," one of the servers replied, already moving to correct the issue. Margaret continued walking, her heels clicking against the marble floor, each step sharp and deliberate. "The investor group from New York will be arriving at 7. Mr. Al-Mansouri expects everything to be flawless," she added. "No delays, no mistakes." Her voice carried a quiet authority that didn't need to be raised. Because everyone already understood the consequences. This wasn't just another dinner. It was an opportunity, one that involved millions of dollars, strategic partnerships, and the kind of influence that could reshape entire industries. The people attending weren't just wealthy, they were powerful. And Margaret intended to ensure that nothing, and no one, compromised that. Her gaze shifted slightly as she reached the end of the hallway. Hannah stood near the staircase, gently rocking Ethan in her arms. She kept her voice low, humming softly under her breath, her attention fully focused on the child. Ethan's small hands rested against her shoulder, his grip loose but steady, his breathing calm. It was a stark contrast to the rest of the house, where everything else moved with urgency. Hannah moved with patience. Margaret's expression tightened. "You!" she called out sharply. Hannah looked up immediately. "Yes, ma'am?" "Bring him upstairs," Margaret said, nodding toward Ethan. "He is not to be anywhere near the main floor tonight." Hannah hesitated for a brief moment, not out of defiance, but concern. "He hasn't been sleeping well," she said carefully, "and he gets anxious when there's too much noise. If he wakes up alone—" "That is not your concern," Margaret interrupted, her tone firm. "Your job is to follow instructions." Hannah lowered her eyes slightly. "Of course." Margaret took a step closer, her voice dropping just enough to carry a sharper edge. "Let me make this very clear," she said. "Tonight is important. Mr. Al-Mansouri does not tolerate disruptions, and neither do I." Her eyes moved briefly to Ethan, then back to Hannah. "You will remain upstairs, out of sight, out of the way." There was no room for negotiation. "Yes, ma'am," Hannah replied quietly. Margaret studied her for a moment longer, as if expecting resistance. But Hannah gave none. She simply adjusted her hold on Ethan and turned toward the staircase. From across the room, one of the other staff members leaned slightly toward another. "She won't last," the woman whispered. "None of them do." The other nodded. "Give it a week." Hannah heard them. She didn't react. She had learned not to. Instead, she focused on the child in her arms, the slow rhythm of his breathing, the small movements of his fingers against her shoulder. That was what mattered. Not the whispers. Not the judgment. Not the place she held in a house that constantly reminded her she didn't belong. Just him. She reached the second floor and walked down the long hallway toward Ethan's room. The space was large, designed with comfort in mind: soft lighting, carefully chosen furniture, toys arranged neatly on low shelves. Everything a child could need. Everything except peace. Hannah stepped inside and gently closed the door behind her. For a moment, Ethan remained still. Then, slowly, he pulled back just enough to look at her. His eyes, dark, searching, held on to hers. "It's okay," Hannah whispered, brushing a strand of hair away from his forehead. "You're safe." Ethan didn't respond with words. He rarely did. But he didn't look away either. And that, in itself, was something. Hannah carried him to the bed and sat down, letting him remain in her arms. She didn't rush to put him down. She didn't force him to separate. Instead, she waited, because she knew what would happen if she didn't. Downstairs, the sound of preparation continued to build. Voices, footsteps, the distant clink of glassware being arranged. Ethan's body tensed slightly. Hannah felt it immediately. "Hey," she said softly, her tone steady. "It's just noise. Nothing's going to happen." She shifted slightly, adjusting her position so he could feel her presence more clearly. "You're okay." For a few seconds, it worked. Ethan's breathing slowed again. But then, a louder sound echoed from below. A door closing. Voices rising. And suddenly, everything changed. Ethan stiffened. His small hands tightened against her shirt. His breathing became uneven. And then, he started crying. Not quietly. Not the soft, controlled kind of crying he sometimes allowed. This was different. Louder. Sharper. More urgent. Hannah's heart dropped. "It's okay," she repeated, her voice calm but firm. "I'm here. I'm right here." But Ethan didn't calm down. If anything, the sound only grew stronger. He pushed slightly against her, then pulled back, then clung to her again, his body caught between panic and the need to stay close. Hannah stood up, holding him securely. She paced slowly across the room, her movements deliberate. "It's okay," she said again. "You're not alone." But the noise from downstairs continued. Voices, laughter, movement. All of it bleeding through the walls in ways that made the room feel less safe. Ethan cried harder, and Hannah knew. If she stayed here, it would only get worse. She paused for a moment, her thoughts racing. Margaret's instructions were clear. Stay upstairs, out of sight, no exceptions. But Ethan's condition, that mattered more. Hannah looked down at him. His face flushed, his breathing uneven, his hands gripping her tightly as if letting go wasn't an option. She made a decision, quietly, without hesitation. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Not to Ethan, but to the consequence she knew would follow. Then she turned toward the door. Step by step, she walked back into the hallway. The sounds from downstairs grew louder with each step. Ethan didn't stop crying. If anything, he held on to her even tighter. Hannah tightened her grip around him. "It's okay," she said softly. "I've got you." She reached the top of the staircase, paused for just a second, then began to walk down. Into a room she had been explicitly told to avoid, into a situation she knew she couldn't control, and into a moment that was about to change everything. By the time Hannah reached the last step, the atmosphere downstairs had already shifted into something polished and controlled. The grand living room glowed under warm chandelier light. Conversations flowed easily between men in tailored suits and women draped in silk and diamonds. Laughter rose in measured bursts. Glasses clinked softly. Every detail had been arranged to project power, success, and effortless perfection. And for a brief moment, no one noticed her. Hannah stepped off the staircase slowly, her arms wrapped securely around Ethan. His crying had softened into uneven breaths, but his body remained tense, pressed tightly against her. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the low hum of voices. "We'll just stay here for a second." She moved carefully along the edge of the room, keeping her head down, hoping to avoid attention. Her focus was entirely on calming Ethan, rocking him gently, murmuring soft reassurances, blocking out everything else. But in a room like this, silence didn't last. A man near the center of the gathering turned slightly, his brow furrowing. "Is that a child?" he asked, not bothering to lower his voice. Another guest followed his gaze. "That's not supposed to be part of tonight's program, is it?" A few heads turned, then more. Within seconds, the shift was complete. Conversations slowed. Eyes followed. Whispers began. Hannah felt it immediately, the weight of attention pressing in from every direction. She kept moving, trying to stay near the wall, trying to find a quiet corner where Ethan could settle. But it was too late. Margaret Doyle appeared almost instantly. Her expression hardened the moment she saw Hannah standing in the room. "What are you doing down here?" she demanded, her voice low but sharp enough to cut through the air. Hannah stopped. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "He wouldn't calm down upstairs. I thought if I stayed near—" "I gave you a direct instruction," Margaret interrupted, stepping closer. "You were not to leave the second floor." "I understand, but he was—" "You don't understand anything," Margaret snapped, her composure beginning to crack under the attention of the guests. "This is exactly why I said you shouldn't be here tonight." A few nearby guests watched the exchange with thinly veiled interest. "Is everything all right?" one of them asked, though his tone suggested he was enjoying the disruption. Margaret forced a tight smile. "Just a minor issue," she replied smoothly. "It will be handled." Hannah lowered her gaze, trying to keep the situation from escalating further. "I can take him back upstairs now," she said quietly. "Yes," Margaret said immediately. "You can. Right now." But as Hannah shifted her weight to turn, someone stepped directly into her path. A man holding a glass of wine, distracted by the unfolding scene, turned just as she moved. The collision was small, barely more than a brush of movement, but it was enough. The bottle in Hannah's hand tilted, and in one sudden, irreversible moment, milk spilled forward. It landed directly across the front of Khalid al-Mansouri's suit. Time stopped. The white fabric of his shirt absorbed the liquid instantly, spreading across the dark material of his jacket in a stark, unmistakable stain. The room fell silent. Not gradually, not slowly, instantly. Every conversation died, every movement froze, and every pair of eyes shifted toward the same point. Hannah stood there, completely still, her breath caught. Her hands tightened instinctively around Ethan. I'm so sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. No one responded. No one moved. Because standing in front of her was not just a guest. It was the man who owned everything around them. Khalid didn't speak. He didn't react the way most people would. He didn't raise his voice, didn't step back, didn't show anger. He simply looked down at the stain. Then slowly, he lifted his gaze. His eyes met Hannah's. And for a moment, there was nothing in his expression. No frustration, no irritation. Just stillness. Margaret broke it first. "Are you out of your mind?" she snapped, her voice ringing through the room. She stepped forward, her composure completely gone now. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" "I didn't mean to—" "Of course you didn't mean to," Margaret cut in sharply. "People like you never mean to. That doesn't change the fact that you just ruined an entire evening." A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Others watched more closely. Some even smiled. "This is exactly why certain standards exist," one man murmured to the person beside him. Hannah's face flushed. "I'll clean it," she said quickly, reaching for a napkin. "I can fix it." "Don't touch him," Margaret snapped, grabbing her wrist before she could move. The contact was firm, controlling. Ethan reacted immediately. His small body tensed. His breathing hitched. And then he cried. Loud. Sharp. The sound cut through the silence like glass breaking. "Take her out of here," Margaret said coldly, releasing Hannah's wrist and gesturing toward the staff. "Now!" Two staff members hesitated. No one wanted to be the first to step forward, not with Khalid standing there, not with the entire room watching. Hannah held Ethan closer. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice trembling now. "It's okay. I've got you." But Ethan didn't calm down. If anything, he held on to her tighter, as one of the staff finally moved closer, reaching out carefully. Ethan's reaction intensified. He buried his face against Hannah's shoulder, his small hands gripping her shirt with surprising strength. "No," Hannah said softly, instinctively stepping back. "He needs a moment." "Enough," Margaret snapped. "You've caused enough disruption already." She turned toward Khalid, her tone shifting instantly. "Sir, I sincerely apologize for this unacceptable situation. She will be dismissed immediately." The room waited. Every guest, every staff member, every breath held in anticipation. Because what happened next would define everything. Khalid remained still. His gaze hadn't left Hannah, or the child in her arms. Ethan's cries echoed softly through the room. But beneath the sound, something else shifted. Something no one else seemed to notice. Ethan moved. Slowly. Carefully. He pulled back just enough to lift his head. His eyes, still wet with tears, focused on Khalid. Then, without hesitation, he reached out, his small hand extended forward, trembling slightly, until it touched Khalid's face. The room froze again. Not from tension, but from something else, something no one could explain. Because in that moment, Ethan wasn't afraid. He wasn't confused. He wasn't reacting the way he usually did around strangers. He was calm. And Khalid felt it, the tiny pressure of that hand against his skin, the steady gaze of a child who had never trusted anyone. And yet, was reaching for him. Not as a stranger, but as something else, something deeper. Khalid's expression changed. Just slightly, barely noticeable, but enough. Enough for Hannah to see it. Enough for something inside the room to shift. And enough to raise a question no one there was prepared to answer. Why was the child reacting like that? And what did it mean? For a moment, no one spoke. Ethan's small hand still rested against Khalid's face, his fingers trembling slightly as if he was holding on to something fragile, something only he could feel. The silence stretched, long enough for discomfort to settle in, long enough for people to begin exchanging uncertain glances. And then, Margaret Doyle stepped forward again, reclaiming control of the situation with practiced precision. "Remove her," she said firmly, her voice no longer raised, but colder now, more dangerous in its restraint. "This has gone on long enough." One of the staff members hesitated, glancing briefly at Khalid for confirmation. But Khalid didn't respond. He didn't move. His gaze remained fixed, not on the stain across his suit, not on the guests waiting for a reaction, but on Hannah and the child in her arms. Margaret's jaw tightened. "Did you not hear me?" she said, turning sharply toward the staff. "Take her upstairs, immediately." The man stepped forward again, slower this time. Careful, as if approaching something unpredictable. "Hannah," he said quietly, almost apologetically, "we need to move." Hannah didn't argue. She didn't protest. Her pride had already taken its hit the moment the milk spilled, the moment the room turned its attention toward her like she was a problem to be corrected. Now, all that mattered was Ethan. "It's okay," she whispered again, her voice soft but steady as she gently adjusted her hold on him. "We're going upstairs." But as the staff member reached out to guide her, Ethan reacted. Immediately. His body tensed, his grip tightened, and his crying returned, louder, sharper, filled with a panic that seemed far beyond his small frame. No, it's okay," Hannah said quickly, pulling him closer. "Don't touch him. He's just scared." "Then calm him down somewhere else," Margaret snapped. "Not here." A few guests shifted uncomfortably, though none of them intervened. One woman leaned toward her companion and whispered, "This is exactly why boundaries are important. You can't just let anyone into a place like this." Her companion nodded. "Standards exist for a reason." The words weren't loud, but they were loud enough. Hannah heard them. She felt them. Each one landing with quiet precision. She kept her eyes down, focused, because reacting wouldn't help. Defending herself wouldn't change anything. Not here. Not in a room where her presence alone was already seen as a mistake. "I'll take him out," she said again, her voice calm despite the pressure building around her. "Just give me a second." But Ethan didn't settle. If anything, the attempt to move him made it worse. His hands clung to her shirt, his face pressed tightly against her shoulder, his cries echoing through the room in a way that made it impossible to ignore. And then he spoke. Softly, barely audible, but clear enough. "Mama." The word slipped out between breaths. Simple. Unforced. Real. The effect was immediate. The room stilled again. A few people frowned, unsure if they had heard correctly. Others looked more closely, because something about that moment didn't fit the narrative they had already formed. Hannah froze. Her heart skipped. She didn't correct him, didn't react, because she knew better. Children didn't always mean what they said, especially not children like Ethan, who struggled to communicate, who expressed things in ways that didn't always follow logic. But still, the word hung in the air, and Khalid heard it. Of course he did. His expression didn't change dramatically, but something behind his eyes shifted. A flicker. A crack in the control he maintained so carefully. Margaret stepped in quickly, trying to redirect the moment before it could grow into something else. "He doesn't know what he's saying," she said sharply. "He's upset, that's all." No one challenged her. But no one looked entirely convinced either, because Ethan wasn't reaching for just anyone. He wasn't calling out randomly. He was holding on to Hannah like she was the only thing grounding him. And everyone could see it. Margaret turned back to Hannah, her tone now colder than before. "You've overstayed your place," she said quietly, so only Hannah could hear. "This is not your environment. It never was." Hannah swallowed. "I understand," she said. "Do you?" Margaret leaned in slightly, because from where I'm standing it looks like you forgot. Hannah didn't respond. There was nothing she could say that would matter. Margaret straightened, addressing the room again with controlled professionalism. "My apologies for the interruption," she said smoothly. "We will resolve this immediately." She gestured again, this time more firmly. The staff stepped forward, and this time there was no hesitation. "Hannah," the man said, his tone more urgent now, "we have to go." Hannah nodded. She shifted Ethan slightly, preparing to move, but before she could take a step, a voice cut through the tension. "Wait." It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be, because it belonged to the only person in the room who didn't need volume to be heard. Khalid. Everything stopped. The staff froze. Margaret turned slowly, her expression carefully neutral. "Yes, sir?" she said. Khalid didn't look at her. He stepped forward, one step, then another, until he stood directly in front of Hannah. Closer now, close enough to see the details most people missed, the slight tremor in her hands, the way she positioned herself between Ethan and the room. Protective. Instinctive. Not calculated, not strategic. Just natural. Khalid's gaze moved from her face to the child in her arms. Ethan had quieted slightly. Not completely, but enough. His small hand still rested against Khalid's sleeve now, as if he had shifted his focus but not his intent. Khalid studied him, carefully. Then he looked back at Hannah. "You said you could calm him," he said. His voice was even, measured, but there was something underneath it now. Something new. Hannah hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded. "Yes," she said softly. Khalid held her gaze, evaluating, weighing something no one else could see. The room waited. Every person present aware that whatever he said next would shift the entire situation. Margaret remained still, though tension had begun to show in the set of her shoulders, because for the first time that night, she didn't know what Khalid was going to do, and neither did anyone else. Khalid's expression didn't reveal his thoughts, but the question forming in his mind was already changing everything. Why would his son, who trusted no one, choose her? And more importantly, what would happen if he didn't let her go? The silence that followed Khalid's voice was different from before. It wasn't shock. It wasn't embarrassment. It was uncertainty, because for the first time that night, the outcome was no longer obvious. Hannah stood still. Ethan pressed against her, his small fingers now gripping the edge of Khalid's sleeve as if letting go wasn't an option. Margaret watched carefully, her posture composed, but her eyes sharper than ever. "Sir," she began, her tone controlled, "this situation has already caused enough disruption. It would be best if we—" "Not yet," Khalid said. Two simple words. Calm. Quiet. But final. Margaret stopped immediately. The room felt tighter now, as if the air itself had shifted. Khalid's gaze remained on Hannah. "You said he calms down with you," he continued. "Prove it." There was no accusation in his voice, no challenge, just a statement. Hannah swallowed, steadying herself. "I can," she said softly. She adjusted Ethan slightly in her arms, turning just enough to shield him from the surrounding crowd. Her movements were slow, deliberate, careful not to trigger another reaction. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "I'm right here." Ethan's breathing was still uneven, his body still tense. But something began to change. Gradually, subtly. His grip loosened, his crying softened into quiet whimpers. Hannah continued, her tone consistent, grounding. "You're safe," she murmured. "Nothing's going to happen to you." She shifted her weight slightly, rocking him with a rhythm that felt natural, unforced, almost instinctive. And then, She began to hum. It wasn't loud. It wasn't meant to be heard by anyone else. Just a simple melody. Soft. Familiar. Comforting. Ethan stilled. Not completely, but enough. His breathing slowed. His shoulders relaxed. And within seconds, the tension that had filled the room began to dissolve, not because of anything anyone said, but because of what they were seeing. A child who trusted no one, calming down in the arms of someone they had all dismissed. A few guests exchanged glances. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others watched more closely now, curiosity replacing amusement. Khalid didn't look away. Not for a second. Because what he was seeing didn't align with anything he understood. This wasn't training. This wasn't technique. This was something else. Something real. Behind him, one of the investors leaned toward another. "That's unusual," he murmured. "You said the boy doesn't respond to anyone." "He doesn't," the other replied quietly. "Not like that." Margaret remained silent, but her expression had changed. Just slightly. Because control was beginning to slip. Hannah didn't notice any of it. Her focus remained entirely on Ethan. She continued humming, her voice steady, her movements calm, as if the rest of the world no longer existed. And slowly, Ethan relaxed. His eyes grew heavy. His breathing evened out. Until finally, he rested his head against her shoulder, completely still. The room held its breath. Because no one had seen that happen before. Not this quickly. Not this easily. Not at all. Khalid stepped closer. Just one step, but it was enough to draw attention. He stopped a few feet away, studying the scene with a level of intensity that made the silence feel heavier. "How long has this been happening?" he asked. Hannah looked up slightly. "Since the second day," she answered. Khalid's brow furrowed. "And no one reported it?" Hannah hesitated. "I didn't think it was something that needed to be reported," she said. "He just needed consistency." Margaret finally spoke. "We were monitoring the situation," she said smoothly. "There was no indication it would become relevant." Khalid didn't respond to her. His attention remained on Hannah. "Consistency," he repeated. The word lingered, as if he was turning it over in his mind, testing it, measuring it against everything he believed. Then, something shifted. Not in the room, but in him. A memory, faint at first, then clearer. A grocery store. Late evening. A line of customers. A man, dressed in worn clothes. Unshaven. Blending into the background like he didn't belong. Ignored. Avoided. Dismissed. Until the cashier refused his card. Voices had risen. People had stepped back. No one wanted to be involved. Except one person. A woman. Simple clothes, tired eyes. She stepped forward without hesitation. "It's okay," she had said. "I'll cover it." No judgment, no hesitation, no expectation of anything in return. Just help. Khalid blinked. The memory sharpened. The tone of her voice. The way she avoided attention afterward. The way she left before anyone could thank her. His gaze returned to Hannah. To the way she held Ethan. To the way she kept her head slightly lowered, as if trying not to take up space she believed wasn't hers. And suddenly, it connected. Not completely, but enough. "Have we met before?" Khalid asked. The question caught Hannah off guard. She shook her head gently. "I don't think so," she replied. Khalid studied her. Carefully. "You're sure?" Hannah frowned slightly, thinking. I would remember, she said. I haven't met many people like you. A few guests shifted at the honesty of that statement. Khalid didn't react outwardly, but internally, the certainty grew. She didn't recognize him, which meant that moment in the store had meant nothing to her beyond what it was. A simple act of kindness, uncalculated, unplanned, real, and yet that same person now stood in front of him, being judged, dismissed, almost removed, in his house, by his people. The realization didn't show on his face, but it changed something. Margaret stepped forward again, sensing the shift. Sir, if you're satisfied, we should continue with the evening, she said. The guests are waiting. Khalid didn't answer immediately. His gaze moved once more to Ethan, now completely calm in Hannah's arms, then back to Hannah. And for the first time, he saw her differently. Not as a risk, not as an outsider, but as something far more dangerous. Someone he couldn't easily explain, which raised a new question, one that lingered far longer than the silence that followed. If her kindness was real, then what else about her was true? The room slowly returned to motion. Conversations restarted, carefully at first, then with increasing confidence, as if the interruption had been nothing more than a brief inconvenience. Laughter followed, softer than before, but present. Glasses lifted, deals resumed. But not everything went back to normal. Not for Hannah. And not for Khalid. Take him upstairs, Margaret said quietly, stepping closer to Hannah again, her tone measured but firm. We will discuss the rest later. There was something different in her voice now. Not just authority. Control, calculated. Hannah nodded without argument. Yes, ma'am. She adjusted Ethan in her arms, careful not to wake him. His breathing was steady now, his small body relaxed against her shoulder, as if the chaos downstairs had never existed. But Hannah hadn't forgotten. She could still feel the weight of the stairs, the whispers, the judgment, and something else. The way Khalid had looked at her. Not with anger, not with dismissal, but with questions. She turned and made her way back toward the staircase, her steps quiet, controlled. Behind her, Margaret remained where she was for a moment, watching. Then she followed. At a distance. Not close enough to draw attention, but close enough to ensure control wasn't lost. The moment Hannah reached the second floor, the noise from downstairs faded into a distant murmur. The hallway felt cooler, quieter, safer. She walked back into Ethan's room and gently closed the door behind her. For a few seconds, she didn't move. She simply stood there, holding him, letting her own breathing slow. Then carefully, slowly, she lowered him onto the bed. Ethan stirred slightly. His fingers tightened for a moment around her sleeve. I'm here, she whispered, placing her hand lightly over his. I'm not going anywhere. His grip loosened. His breathing remained steady. And within seconds, he was still again. Hannah exhaled softly. Only then did she allow herself to step back, to feel everything she had been holding in. Her hands trembled slightly. Not from fear, but from exhaustion. From pressure. From the constant need to remain composed in a place that never let her forget she didn't belong. A knock came at the door. Sharp. Precise. Hannah straightened immediately. Come in, she said. Margaret entered without waiting. She closed the door behind her, her expression unreadable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Margaret's eyes moved to the bed, to Ethan, then back to Hannah. You embarrassed me tonight, she said finally. The words were quiet, but heavy. Hannah lowered her gaze. I'm sorry, she said. That's not enough, Margaret replied. This house operates on standards, structure, discipline. You disrupted all of that. I didn't mean to, Hannah said, her voice steady despite the tension building in her chest. Margaret took a step closer. That's the problem, she said. People like you never mean to. But intention doesn't matter here. Results do. Hannah remained silent, because she had heard it before, in different words, in different places, but always with the same meaning. You don't belong here. Margaret watched her carefully. Then, without another word, she reached into the folder she was carrying and pulled out a document. She held it out. Sign this, she said. Hannah hesitated. What is it? A formal acknowledgement of fault, Margaret replied. You take full responsibility for the incident tonight. You agree that your actions disrupted an important event and accept the consequences. Hannah looked at the paper. Her eyes moved across the words. Each line carefully written, precise, deliberate. This says I was negligent, she said quietly. You were, Margaret replied without hesitation. Hannah looked up. I was pushed, she said. Someone walked into me. Margaret's expression didn't change. And yet you were the one holding the bottle, she said, which makes it your responsibility. Hannah's fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the paper. If I sign this, what happens? Margaret met her gaze. You keep your job, she said. For now. And if I don't? Margaret didn't hesitate. You're dismissed. Immediately. The words landed exactly where they were meant to. Hannah looked down again. At the paper. At the choice in front of her. It wasn't really a choice. Not when she thought about her mother. The medical bills. The rent. The reality waiting for her outside these walls. Margaret saw the hesitation and pressed further. This is your opportunity to correct your mistake, she said. Don't make it worse. Hannah's hand trembled slightly as she picked up the pen. But before she could sign, a memory surfaced. Uninvited. Unwanted. But clear. A hospital room. Bright lights. Voices raised in panic. A child struggling to breathe. Doctors moving too slowly. A decision made in seconds. Act now, or lose him. Hannah blinked. The image faded. But the feeling remained. The same feeling she had carried with her ever since. The same moment that had changed everything. You're going to lose your license for this, someone had said. I didn't do anything wrong, she had replied. That's not how it looks. The words echoed. Familiar. Painful. Hannah looked at the paper again. At the statement. At the blame. And for a moment, she couldn't move. Margaret noticed. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Is there a problem? She asked. Hannah swallowed. Her voice quiet. But different now. Why does this feel familiar? She said. Margaret's expression flickered. Just slightly. Almost imperceptible. But it was there, and Hannah saw it. A shift. A hesitation. Something off. You're overthinking, Margaret said quickly. Sign it. But Hannah didn't move. Because something inside her, something she had ignored for too long, was starting to resurface. The past she had tried to leave behind. The incident that had taken everything from her. The unanswered questions. The missing details. And now, standing in this room, holding this paper, facing someone who seemed just a little too certain. A new question formed. One she hadn't allowed herself to ask before. What if it hadn't been an accident? And more importantly, what if the truth had never been what she was told? Hannah didn't sign. Not immediately. The pen hovered above the paper, her fingers tense, her thoughts louder than anything Margaret could say. What if it hadn't been an accident? The question echoed in her mind again. Margaret watched her closely now, no longer hiding the impatience in her expression. "You're wasting time," she said. "This is a simple formality." Hannah looked up. "Was it really?" she asked quietly. Margaret's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" Hannah hesitated. She wasn't sure why she had said it, or why the feeling wouldn't go away, but something about the situation, about the way everything had unfolded tonight, felt controlled. Too controlled. The collision, the missing space, the immediate accusation, the prepared document. It all felt like pieces of something she couldn't fully see yet. Hannah paused, choosing her words carefully. It felt like it happened too fast. Margaret's tone sharpened. "That's what mistakes look like," she said. "Unexpected, uncontrolled, and damaging." Hannah lowered her gaze again. But she didn't sign. Not yet. Before Margaret could push further, a sound broke the tension. Soft at first, then louder. "Ethan." Hannah turned immediately. He was moving on the bed, his body restless, his breathing uneven again. "No," she whispered, stepping closer. Ethan's eyes opened. Wide. Unfocused. Then suddenly, alert. He looked around the room quickly, his small chest rising and falling faster. "It's okay," Hannah said gently, sitting beside him. "You're safe." But Ethan didn't calm down. Not this time. His eyes shifted. Past her. Toward the door. Toward Margaret. His expression changed. Tension returned to his body. And then, he pointed. His small hand lifted, unsteady but deliberate, toward Margaret Doyle. Hannah froze. Margaret didn't move. "What is he doing?" she asked, her voice controlled but tighter now. Hannah didn't answer immediately, because she was watching Ethan. Really watching him. Not just the movement, but the intention behind it. Ethan's fingers trembled as he pointed again. His lips moved, trying to form words. "Hey, it's okay," Hannah said softly, turning slightly so she could face him directly. "Tell me." Ethan shook his head slightly, not in refusal, in frustration, as if the words weren't coming out the way he needed them to. He pointed again, harder this time. He struggled. Margaret shifted her weight. "This is ridiculous," she said. "He's upset. That's all." But Hannah didn't look at her. Her focus remained entirely on Ethan. "Take your time," she whispered. "You don't have to rush." Ethan's breathing quickened again. His eyes filled with something deeper now. Not just fear. Recognition. Memory. He turned his head slightly, still pointing, and tried again. "Lady." The word came out broken, incomplete, but clear enough. Hannah's heart skipped. "Which lady?" she asked softly. Ethan's hand didn't waver. Still pointing. Still fixed. Margaret's expression tightened. "Hannah," she said, her voice lower now. "Stop this." But Hannah didn't move. "Ethan," she continued gently, ignoring Margaret completely now. "What lady?" Ethan's hand dropped for a second, then lifted again. He looked around the room quickly, then back at Hannah. Then he made a small motion with his hand, pulling it toward himself, then pushing it away, repeating the movement, again and again. Hannah frowned slightly, trying to understand. "Are you showing me something?" she asked. Ethan nodded. Barely, but enough. Then he said another word, this time clearer. "Box." The room stilled. Margaret didn't speak, didn't move. But something had shifted. Hannah felt it. "What box?" she asked softly. Ethan looked toward the door again, then back at Margaret, then back at Hannah. His hand moved again, the same motion, pulling, hiding, pushing away. Hannah's mind raced. "Did you see something?" she asked. Ethan's eyes widened. He nodded again, more firmly this time. Hannah's chest tightened. She turned slowly, her gaze lifting from Ethan to Margaret. Margaret stood perfectly still. Too still, her posture unchanged. But her eyes, there was something there now, something guarded. "Enough," Margaret said, her voice sharper than before. "He's confused. You're confusing him more." But Hannah didn't respond, because something was starting to connect. Not fully, not clearly, but enough to form a question. A dangerous one. "Did he see you take something?" Hannah asked quietly. Margaret's reaction was immediate. "How dare you?" she said, her tone cold. "You're in no position to make accusations." "I'm not accusing," Hannah replied. "I'm asking." Ethan made a small sound. Urgent. He pointed again, then pressed his hand against the bed, then lifted it, as if mimicking placing something down, then hiding it. Hannah's breath caught, because suddenly, it made sense. The missing item, the immediate blame, the broken cameras. And now, a child trying to explain something he didn't have the words for. Margaret stepped forward. "That's enough," she said. "This conversation is over." But before she could take another step, a voice spoke from the doorway. "Is it?" Both women turned. Khalid stood there, silent, watching. He hadn't been announced, hadn't made a sound entering, but he had heard enough. His gaze moved from Margaret, to Hannah, to Ethan, then back to Margaret. "Explain," he said. The word was calm, controlled, but heavier than anything else in the room. Margaret straightened immediately. "Sir, the child is upset," she said. "He's saying random things. It doesn't mean anything." Khalid didn't look convinced. "Random?" he repeated. Ethan shifted again. His eyes moved to Khalid now, then back to Margaret. Then he pointed again, this time more urgently, and said one more word. "Hiding." The silence that followed was different. Because now, everyone understood. Not everything, but enough. Enough to know this wasn't random. Enough to know something had happened. And enough to realize the situation was no longer under control. Khalid took a step forward. Slow. Measured. His gaze fixed on Margaret. And for the first time that night, there was no uncertainty left in his eyes. Only one question, and it was far more dangerous than anything that had come before. What exactly had she been hiding? The word lingered in the room. Hiding. It wasn't loud. It wasn't clear. But it was enough. Enough to fracture the illusion of control Margaret had maintained all evening. Khalid didn't move right away. He stood in the doorway, his presence filling the space with a quiet authority that made every second feel heavier. Ethan's small hand remained raised, still pointing, still insisting, as if letting it drop would mean losing the truth he was trying so hard to hold on to. Hannah stayed beside the bed, her heart racing, her thoughts catching up to what she was beginning to understand. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't fear. This was memory. And Ethan was trying to tell them something. "Where?" Khalid asked. His voice was calm, measured, but it carried a weight that made it impossible to ignore. Ethan looked at him, then back at Hannah. His lips parted again, searching for the words. "Box," he said, more clearly this time. Hannah leaned closer. "You saw a box?" she asked gently. Ethan nodded, his breathing uneven again, but focused. "Where is it?" she continued softly. Ethan turned his head toward the door, then beyond it, toward the hallway, then back again. His hand made the same motion. Pull, hide, push away, repeat. Hannah followed his gaze, trying to interpret, trying to connect the fragments. Khalid stepped fully into the room. The door remained open behind him. "Stay with him," he said quietly to Hannah. Then he looked at Margaret. "Walk with me." Margaret didn't hesitate. Of course she didn't. "Of course, sir," she replied, her tone controlled, her posture composed. But there was something beneath it now, something tighter, more cautious. As they stepped into the hallway, the distance between them felt smaller than it actually was. Khalid didn't speak immediately. He walked. Slowly. Deliberately. As if giving Margaret space to explain. She didn't. Because she couldn't. "What is he referring to?" Khalid asked finally. Margaret's answer came quickly. "I don't know," she said. "He's a child. He's upset. Stop," Khalid said. The word wasn't loud, but it cut through her explanation instantly. Margaret fell silent. Khalid turned to face her. Fully, now. "You've worked in this house for 12 years, he said. "You don't make mistakes." It wasn't a compliment. It was an observation. A fact. Margaret inclined her head slightly. "I do my best to maintain order," she replied. "And yet tonight," Khalid continued, "we have a missing item, a broken camera system, and a child pointing at you." Margaret's expression remained steady, but her breathing had changed. Subtly. Barely noticeable. But enough. "With respect, sir," she said carefully. "Those are coincidences." Khalid held her gaze. "Are they?" Before she could answer. Footsteps approached from the far end of the hallway. 2 staff members. One of them held something in his hands. A small rectangular object, wrapped in velvet. Khalid's eyes shifted immediately. "What is that?" he asked. The man hesitated for a brief second, then stepped forward. "We found this, sir," he said, "in the east storage room." Margaret's posture stiffened, just for a second. But it was enough. Khalid noticed. "Open it," he said. The man did, carefully. The velvet unfolded, revealing a silver box. Ornate, expensive, unmistakable. The same item that had been reported missing earlier that evening. The hallway fell silent. Not the kind of silence that comes from confusion, but the kind that comes when something clicks into place. Slowly, inevitably. Khalid's gaze moved from the box to Margaret. "Explain," he said. Margaret didn't respond immediately, because this time, there was no prepared answer. "It was misplaced," she said finally. "One of the staff must have—" "In your storage room?" Khalid interrupted. The question landed harder than anything else. Margaret's composure slipped, just slightly, but enough. I can't account for every item at every moment, she said. That's not how— But you can account for who has access, Khalid said. Another pause. Longer this time, because the truth was narrowing, closing in. Margaret's eyes shifted briefly. Not away, but just enough. As if calculating, adjusting, searching for a way out. There are multiple keys, she said. Anyone could have— Not anyone, Khalid said quietly. He took a step closer, his voice lower now, more controlled, more dangerous. You restricted access to that room yourself, he continued. 3 months ago, after the inventory audit. Margaret's breath caught, just for a second. But this time, everyone saw it. The staff, the silence, the shift. Khalid's gaze didn't waver. Try again, he said. The words were calm, but final. Margaret didn't speak. Because she couldn't. Because the story she had prepared no longer fit. Behind them, Hannah stood in the doorway, Ethan still in her arms now. She hadn't meant to follow, but she had. Drawn by the tension, by the feeling that something important was unfolding. Ethan shifted slightly. His eyes moved to the box, then to Margaret, then back to Hannah, and once again, he pointed. This time there was no hesitation, no confusion, just certainty. Margaret saw it, and for the first time that night, fear appeared. Real, uncontrolled, not loud, not dramatic, but there, in her eyes. Khalid noticed. Of course he did. Because that was the moment everything changed, not the box, not the accusation, not even the child's words, but that look. The one thing Margaret Doyle had never allowed herself to show. And now, she couldn't hide it. Khalid straightened slightly, his expression returning to something colder, more familiar. Have security review every camera, he said to the staff, including backups. Yes, sir. And lock down the east wing, he added. No one enters or leaves without my approval. The man nodded quickly and moved. Margaret remained where she was. Still, silent. Because she understood, better than anyone, that this wasn't over, not even close. Khalid looked at her one last time, not with anger, not with disappointment, but with something far worse, certainty. Then he turned, walking back toward the room, toward his son, toward Hannah, leaving behind a question that no longer needed to be asked out loud. If this was only the beginning, then what else had been hidden? The hallway slowly emptied. Staff moved with urgency now. Quieter. Faster. More precise. Orders had been given, and in a house like this, orders were never questioned. Security would review footage. Access would be restricted. Every corner of the estate would be accounted for. But inside Ethan's room, the tension remained. Hannah stood near the bed, her arms wrapped protectively around him. He had settled again, though not fully asleep. His breathing calm, but his fingers still curled into the fabric of her sleeve as if anchoring himself. The silver box sat on a small table near the door. Unopened now. Waiting. Khalid entered slowly. He closed the door behind him this time, not loudly, but deliberately, creating a space separate from everything outside, separate from the staff, from the guests, from the performance that had been carefully constructed downstairs. For a moment, no one spoke. Hannah lowered her gaze slightly, unsure of what would come next. She had crossed boundaries, broken rules, questioned authority. And now she stood in front of the one man who could end her position with a single word. But Khalid didn't speak to dismiss her. He walked past her, toward the table, toward the box. He looked at it for a long second before reaching down and opening it himself. Inside, the contents were exactly as expected. Nothing missing, nothing altered, which made the situation even clearer. This hadn't been theft. It had been placement, intentional, calculated. Khalid closed the box again, slowly. Then he turned, not toward the door, not toward the hallway, but toward Hannah. "You stayed," he said. It wasn't a question. Hannah hesitated. "I didn't think I should leave," she replied quietly. "Not while he was like this." Khalid's gaze shifted to Ethan, then back to her. "You ignored a direct order," he continued. Hannah nodded. "Yes." There was no excuse in her voice, no attempt to soften it, just truth. "And you challenged my staff," Khalid added. "I asked a question," she said, "because something didn't feel right." Khalid studied her, carefully. Then, something changed. Subtly, but completely. "This evening," he said, "was not what it appeared to be." Hannah frowned slightly. "I don't understand." Khalid took a step closer. Not threatening, not imposing, but intentional. "The investors downstairs," he continued, "were invited for a reason, but not the one they believe." Hannah remained still, listening. "This house," Khalid said, "has been under internal review for the past 3 months. Staff behavior, security gaps, operational trust." He paused, letting the words settle. "I've been observing," he added, "not as the owner, but as something else." Hannah's eyes lifted slightly. Confusion, curiosity, concern. "All of it," Khalid continued, "has been a test." The word hung in the air. A test. Hannah's grip on Ethan tightened slightly. "You mean tonight?" she asked. "Yes," Khalid said. "Everything?" "Everything." The room felt different now, not just tense, revealing. Hannah's thoughts moved quickly, trying to catch up. "The missing item," she began. "Placed," Khalid said. "The cameras?" "Partially disabled, on purpose." Hannah's breath caught. "And the way everyone reacted was exactly what I needed to see." Silence followed, because the realization was bigger than the moment. This wasn't just an incident. It was exposure. Of people. Of behavior. Of truth. Hannah looked down at Ethan, then back at Khalid. "And me?" she asked quietly. Khalid didn't answer immediately, because that part was different. "You weren't supposed to be part of it," he said finally. Hannah blinked. "But you became central to it anyway." The words weren't harsh, but they carried weight. "What does that mean?" she asked. Khalid held her gaze. "It means," he said, "that every assumption I had about this house, and the people in it, was incomplete." He paused, then added, "Until you." Hannah didn't know how to respond, because she didn't understand what he was seeing, what he was measuring, what she had changed. Khalid stepped closer again, his voice lower now, more personal. "You didn't try to impress anyone," he said. "You didn't seek attention. You didn't align yourself with authority." Hannah swallowed. "I was just doing my job." Khalid shook his head slightly. "No," he said. "You were doing something else." Hannah's brow furrowed. "What?" Khalid's eyes moved briefly to Ethan, then back to her. "You chose him," he said. The words landed differently, not as an observation, but as a realization. "You chose his well-being over your position," Khalid continued, "over your security, over your place in this house." Hannah looked down, because she hadn't thought of it that way. She hadn't thought of it at all. "It wasn't a choice," she said softly. "He needed someone." Khalid held her gaze, and everyone else chose not to be that person. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy, full of something unspoken. Khalid turned slightly, walking toward the window, his reflection faint against the glass. "For years," he said, "I've built systems to eliminate risk." He paused. "People are the greatest risk," he added. "They lie. They manipulate. They pretend." Hannah listened, because she understood, more than she wanted to. "I needed to know," Khalid continued, "who in this house was real." He turned back to her. "And who wasn't?" The answer now was clear. Hannah shifted slightly, adjusting Ethan in her arms. "So what happens now?" she asked. Khalid didn't answer right away, because that question had more than one meaning. What happens to Margaret? To the staff? To the system he had built? But also, what happens to her? Khalid's gaze settled on Hannah again, steady, focused. "And more importantly," he said quietly, "what happens when the one person I didn't plan for?" He paused, just long enough. "Turns out to be the only one I can trust?" The question hung in the air. Not rhetorical, not casual, real. Hannah didn't answer, because she didn't know how to. She had never seen herself the way Khalid was describing her, never thought of her actions as anything beyond necessity. Survival. Care. Not trust, not significance, not importance. Ethan stirred slightly in her arms, pulling her attention back. His fingers tightened again around her sleeve, as if grounding himself in her presence. Khalid noticed. Of course he did. And something about that connection, the simplicity of it, the honesty of it, forced another memory forward. Not faint this time. Not distant. Clear. Sharp. Unavoidable. A hospital room. Bright lights. Machines beeping. Voices tense. A doctor stepping back. "We're losing him." Khalid's chest tightened. The memory pressed harder. A smaller version of Ethan. Newborn. Fragile. Struggling. And then, another voice. Calm. Steady. Focused. "No, we're not." A young woman stepping forward. Not the lead doctor, not the one in charge, but the one who moved first, who acted, who didn't wait for permission. "His airway, now." Hands moving quickly. Precise. Instinctive. No hesitation. The room shifting around her, following her lead. Because in that moment, she knew what she was doing. Khalid's breath slowed. His eyes narrowed slightly as the memory aligned with the present. The tone of her voice, the rhythm of her movements, the same quiet control he had just witnessed. He looked at Hannah again. Really looked this time. Not as a nanny, not as a staff member, but as someone he had seen before. "Where did you train?" he asked suddenly. Hannah blinked. The shift in topic caught her off guard. "I was studying nursing," she said. "I didn't finish." Khalid stepped closer. "Where?" "St. Matthew's Children's Hospital," she replied. The name landed, exactly where it needed to. Khalid's expression changed. Not dramatically, but undeniably. How long were you there? Almost a year, Hannah said. I was in clinical rotations. And you left? He asked. Hannah hesitated, then nodded. Yes. Why? The question wasn't casual. It was direct, intentional. Hannah's grip tightened slightly around Ethan. I was involved in an incident, she said quietly. A patient case. Something went wrong. Khalid didn't interrupt. Records were incomplete, she continued. There were discrepancies. I was blamed. Her voice remained steady, but the weight behind it was clear. I lost my position, she added. My license eligibility. Everything. Silence followed, because the pieces were no longer scattered. They were aligning. Fast. Khalid's voice dropped slightly. What was the case? He asked. Hannah looked at him. For a second. She hesitated, not out of fear, but because she didn't expect him to understand. It was a neonatal emergency, she said. A newborn in respiratory distress. Khalid didn't move. Go on. Hannah swallowed. There was a delay, she said. Protocols, approvals. The lead physician wasn't available. Her eyes dropped briefly. I stepped in, she continued. I shouldn't have. Not officially. Khalid's gaze sharpened. But you did, he said. Hannah nodded. Yes. And the outcome? Hannah exhaled softly. The baby survived. The words were simple, but they carried everything. Relief, pride, pain, loss. Then why were you blamed? Khalid asked. Hannah's jaw tightened slightly. Because the documentation didn't match the timeline, she said. Because I wasn't authorized. Because someone needed to take responsibility. Khalid's expression darkened. Who signed the report? Hannah shook her head. I never saw the final version, she said. I was removed before it was processed. Khalid turned slightly, his thoughts moving faster now. Because he remembered the report. He remembered the discrepancies, the confusion, the unresolved details. At the time it had been filed away, handled, closed. But now, standing here, looking at her, hearing this, it was no longer closed. Do you remember the date? He asked. Hannah frowned slightly. It was late October, she said. 2 years ago. Khalid's breath stilled, because that was the date, the exact date. He turned back to her slowly. The child you treated, he said. Hannah looked at him. Yes? Khalid held her gaze. He was my son. The room went completely still, not silent, still, as if time itself had paused. Hannah's eyes widened. Her grip on Ethan tightened instinctively. No, she whispered. That's not... It is, Khalid said. There was no doubt in his voice, no uncertainty, just truth. Hannah shook her head slightly. I would have known, she said. I would have remembered. You wouldn't, Khalid said. You weren't given the full case file. You weren't told who he was. Hannah's breath caught. Because that part made sense. Too much sense. The report, Khalid continued, his voice colder now, more controlled, credited the attending physician. Hannah didn't speak, because she already knew, deep down. The one who arrived after you had already stabilized him, Khalid added. Hannah's hands trembled, just slightly. But you were the one who acted, he said. You were the one who saved him. The weight of it landed all at once, not slowly, not gradually, all at once. Ethan shifted in her arms, his small hand pressed against her chest, as if responding to something deeper than words. Hannah looked down at him, then back at Khalid. "I didn't know," she whispered. Khalid nodded. "I believe you." The room felt different now, not tense, not uncertain, but irreversible. Because everything that had happened, the connection, the trust, the reaction, it all made sense. Ethan hadn't chosen her randomly. He hadn't trusted her by chance. He remembered, not consciously, not clearly, but emotionally, instinctively. She had been there, in the moment that mattered most. And now, he was holding on to her again. Khalid took a slow breath, his voice quieter now, but heavier than anything he had said before. "The person who saved my son." He paused, his gaze fixed on Hannah. "Was standing in front of me the entire time." And he had almost let her be thrown out. No one spoke for several seconds, not because there was nothing to say, but because everything that needed to be understood already had been. Hannah stood frozen where she was, Ethan still in her arms, her mind struggling to keep up with the reality that had just been placed in front of her. "You're saying," she began slowly, her voice unsteady for the first time. "That night, that baby." Khalid didn't look away. "Yes." The confirmation was quiet, but absolute. Hannah's breath caught. Her eyes moved instinctively to Ethan, to the small rise and fall of his chest, to the weight of him in her arms, to the life she had once fought to protect, without knowing who he would become, or what he would mean. "I thought I lost everything because of that," she whispered. Khalid's jaw tightened. "You did," he said. The honesty didn't soften the moment. It deepened it. "Because someone made sure of it." The words landed differently now, not as a general statement, but as a direction, a truth that pointed somewhere specific. Margaret stood near the doorway, still composed, still silent, but no longer invisible. Her presence in the room had shifted. Before, she had been authority. Now, she was the unknown. Khalid turned, slowly, his gaze settling on her with a level of focus that made it clear. This was no longer about suspicion. It was about answers. "You knew," he said. Margaret didn't respond immediately, because there was no benefit in rushing now. No advantage in denial, not when the pieces had already aligned. "I managed the internal report," she said finally, her tone controlled, almost clinical. "It was part of my responsibility at the time." Hannah felt her stomach drop. "You were there?" she asked. Margaret's eyes moved to her briefly. "Yes." The simplicity of the answer made it worse. "You reviewed the incident?" Khalid asked. "I finalized it," Margaret replied. Silence followed. Heavy. Focused. Khalid stepped closer. "And you reassigned credit," he said. Margaret didn't deny it. "The attending physician was the official lead," she said. "That is how the system works." "That's not what I asked," Khalid said, his voice sharper now. "Did you change the report?" Margaret held his gaze. For a moment. She considered. Then she exhaled, quietly. "Yes." The word hit harder than anything else, not because it was loud, but because it was final. Hannah's grip on Ethan tightened instinctively. "Why?" she asked. Margaret turned to her fully now, not defensive, not emotional, just direct. "Because you weren't supposed to be the one who saved him," she said. The statement was cold, unapologetic. You were a trainee, she continued. Unlicensed. Unauthorized. If something had gone wrong, the liability would have been catastrophic. But it didn't go wrong, Hannah said, her voice trembling. He lived. Yes, Margaret said, and that made it more complicated. Khalid's expression darkened. Explain, he said. Margaret's posture straightened slightly. Your son survived because of an action that technically violated protocol, she said. If that had been documented properly, it would have triggered an investigation, not just into the hospital, but into your entire care network. Khalid didn't interrupt. Reassigning credit stabilized the situation, she continued. It protected the institution, it protected the staff, and it prevented unnecessary scrutiny. Hannah stared at her. You destroyed my career, she said quietly. Margaret didn't flinch. I preserved a system that functions on order, she replied. The words hung in the air. Because they weren't an apology. They weren't even an excuse. They were a justification. Khalid took another step forward. And tonight? He asked. The box. The accusation. Margaret's eyes shifted again. This time there was no attempt to hide it. I needed to confirm something, she said. What? Khalid demanded. Margaret looked at Hannah, then back at him. Whether she was a risk. The answer was immediate. Calculated. I recognized her when she arrived, Margaret continued. Not by name, but by pattern. The way she moved, the way she responded to pressure. It was familiar. Hannah's breath caught. So you set me up? She asked. I created a scenario, Margaret said. To observe. You tried to have me removed, Hannah said. If necessary, Margaret replied. The room fell silent again. Because now, everything was clear. The milk incident. The missing item. The pressure. The forced confession. None of it had been random. None of it had been accidental. It had all been designed. Khalid's voice dropped, dangerously calm. You manipulated my household, he said. I protected it, Margaret replied. Khalid didn't respond immediately, because for the first time in a long time, he wasn't calculating. He wasn't analyzing. He was deciding. Ethan shifted again. His small hand reached out, grabbing lightly at Hannah's shirt, grounding, present, real. Khalid looked at them, at the connection, at the truth that had revealed itself without manipulation, without control. And then he spoke. It's over. 2 words. Clear. Final. Margaret's expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes did. You're dismissing me? She asked. I'm removing you, Khalid said. Effective immediately. Silence. Then, he added, and I will be reopening every report you've ever handled. That landed. Harder than anything else. Because this time, Margaret understood the consequences. Not just of tonight, but of everything. Security arrived within seconds. Quiet. Efficient. Margaret didn't resist. She didn't argue. Because she knew there was nothing left to control. As she was escorted out, her gaze passed over Hannah one last time. Not with anger, not with regret, but with something colder. Then she was gone. The door closed. And the room shifted again. Not into chaos, not into tension, but into something else. Release. Khalid turned back to Hannah. For a moment, neither of them spoke, because there were no easy words for what had just happened, no simple way to process it. But one thing was clear. The truth had been revealed. And nothing would ever go back to the way it was. The house felt different the next morning. Not quieter, not calmer, but reset. Like something invisible had been stripped away overnight. Layers of control, of hierarchy, of assumptions that no longer held the same power. Staff moved through the halls with a new kind of awareness. Conversations were softer. Eyes were more careful. Even the smallest interactions carried a sense that something fundamental had shifted. Because it had. Margaret Doyle was gone. No formal announcement had been made, but no one needed one. The absence was enough. The space she once occupied, both physically and in authority, felt unmistakably empty. And in that space, uncertainty had taken its place. Hannah noticed it the moment she stepped out of Ethan's room. 2 staff members paused mid-conversation when they saw her. Their expressions changed. Not into warmth, not yet, but into something more cautious. Respect, perhaps. Or at least the beginning of it. She wasn't invisible anymore, but she didn't feel comfortable either, because visibility came with attention. And attention, in a place like this, had consequences. She adjusted her grip on Ethan, who rested against her shoulder, calmer than he had been in weeks. His breathing was steady. His body relaxed. That part hadn't changed. If anything, it had improved. But everything else felt uncertain. Hannah. She turned at the sound of her name. Khalid stood at the end of the hallway. Not in a suit this time, not surrounded by staff or expectation, just present. "Can we talk?" he asked. Hannah nodded. Of course. She followed him into a smaller sitting room nearby. The space was quiet, understated, far from the grand rooms downstairs. More personal, more private. Khalid gestured toward a chair. "Please." Hannah sat, carefully adjusting Ethan in her arms so he wouldn't wake. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Not because they didn't know what to say, but because there was too much. Too much that had happened. Too much that had changed. "I reviewed the records," Khalid said finally. Hannah looked up. "The hospital files," he continued. "Everything connected to that night." Her fingers tightened slightly around Ethan's sleeve. "And?" she asked. Khalid's expression remained steady. "They confirm what you said," he replied. "You acted first. You stabilized him. Without you, he wouldn't have survived." The words didn't feel like validation. They felt like weight, because they came too late. Hannah looked down. "I never needed recognition," she said quietly. "I just needed the truth." Khalid nodded. "I know." Silence followed. Not uncomfortable, but honest. "I've already contacted the hospital," Khalid added. "An internal review has been reopened. The report will be corrected." Hannah didn't respond immediately, because part of her, a part she hadn't acknowledged in a long time, had stopped expecting justice. "And my license?" she asked. Khalid met her gaze. "I can't promise outcomes," he said, "but I can ensure the process is fair this time." Hannah nodded slowly. "That's enough." It was a simple answer, but it meant more than he expected. Khalid studied her for a moment. Then, "There's something else," he said. Hannah looked up again. Khalid's tone shifted slightly, more deliberate. "I want you to stay," he said. The words were direct, clear, uncomplicated. Hannah blinked. "I'm already working here," she said. "That's not what I mean," Khalid replied. He leaned forward slightly. "I want you to stay in a different capacity," he continued. "Not as temporary staff, not as someone under supervision." He paused. "Ethan needs you." Hannah's eyes moved instinctively to the child in her arms. He stirred slightly, as if responding to his name, then settled again. "I care about him," she said softly. "I know," Khalid replied, "and that's exactly why I'm asking." Hannah hesitated, because this wasn't just about work. It wasn't just about stability. It was about something deeper, something more complicated. "I don't know if I can," she said. Khalid didn't react immediately. "Because of what happened?" he asked. Hannah shook her head. "Because of what almost happened," she said. Her voice remained calm, but the meaning was clear. "I was standing in a room full of people who had already decided who I was," she continued. "Before I said a word, before I did anything." Khalid didn't interrupt. "Nothing about that has changed," she added. The words weren't accusatory. They were honest. Khalid exhaled slowly. "You're right," he said. That caught her off guard. "I built a system that allowed that to happen," he continued. "And I didn't see it until it was too late." Hannah looked at him. Really looked. Because this wasn't the same man she had seen the night before. This wasn't control. This wasn't calculation. This was something else. Recognition. Responsibility. "I can change that system," Khalid said, "but not overnight." Hannah nodded. "I understand. But I can start with this," he added. "With you." The offer hung between them. Not as pressure, not as obligation, but as possibility. Hannah looked down again. At Ethan. At the small hand still curled into her sleeve. At the quiet trust he had placed in her. And for a moment, everything else faded. The house, the staff, the past. All of it. Because this was real. "I'll stay," she said finally. Khalid didn't react immediately, because he understood. That wasn't a decision made lightly. "But not because of the job," Hannah added. Khalid raised an eyebrow slightly. "Then why?" Hannah looked up, her expression steady. "Because he needs someone who sees him," she said. Khalid nodded. "And because," she continued, "I'm not done fixing what was broken." The words carried more than one meaning, and they both knew it. Khalid leaned back slightly. For the first time, there was something close to relief in his expression. "Then we'll fix it," he said. Not as a promise, but as a direction. Ethan shifted again, his hand tightening briefly before relaxing. And in that quiet moment, with nothing left to prove, and nothing left to hide, one truth became clear. Everything that had been taken from Hannah was finally beginning to return. The changes didn't happen overnight. They never do. But in the weeks that followed, the Al-Mansouri estate began to shift in ways no one could ignore. It started quietly. Small adjustments, subtle decisions, the kind that didn't draw attention at first, but slowly rewrote the structure of everything. Margaret's absence created a gap that couldn't be filled by simply replacing her. The systems she had enforced were still there, but without her presence, they felt less rigid, less absolute. Khalid didn't appoint a new head of household immediately. Instead, he changed the structure entirely. Responsibilities were redistributed. Decisions were reviewed. And for the first time, staff were asked, not told, how things could improve. It made people uncomfortable. At first, because they weren't used to being heard, but over time, that discomfort began to turn into something else. Trust. Careful. Cautious. But real. Hannah stayed out of most of it. By choice. She didn't attend meetings, didn't involve herself in the restructuring. Her focus remained where it had always been, on Ethan. And that focus was beginning to show. Ethan changed. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but consistently. He started speaking more. Single words at first, then short phrases. He made eye contact more often, stayed calm in situations that would have overwhelmed him before. And most importantly, he laughed. Not often, not loudly, but enough. Enough to shift the atmosphere around him. Hannah noticed every detail, every small improvement, every step forward. Because to her, those things mattered more than anything else. They were proof that patience worked, that presence mattered, that trust, when given time, could grow. One afternoon, she sat with him in the garden, the sunlight soft against the grass, as he played quietly with a small wooden toy. "You're getting better at this," she said gently, watching him stack the pieces. Ethan looked up at her. For a second, he didn't say anything. Then, "Stay," he said. The word was simple, but clear. Hannah's heart tightened slightly. "I am staying," she replied softly. Ethan nodded, as if that was enough. Across the yard, Khalid stood near the edge of the terrace, watching them. Not from a distance, but not close enough to interrupt, just observing. He had been doing that more often, not in secret, not hidden, just quietly present, learning. Because for the first time in a long time, he didn't have all the answers, and he wasn't pretending to. A voice interrupted his thoughts. "The board meeting is ready, sir." Khalid turned. One of his assistants stood nearby, tablet in hand. Khalid nodded. "I'll be there shortly." The assistant hesitated. "There's also a call from the foundation," she added. "They've finalized the proposal." Khalid paused. "Which one?" "The Domestic Staff Protection Initiative." Khalid's expression shifted slightly. "Send it to my office," he said. "I'll review it after the meeting." "Yes, sir." The assistant left. Khalid turned back toward the garden, toward Hannah, toward Ethan. Because everything he was building now, everything he was changing, started there. Weeks later, the results began to take shape. The foundation Khalid had quietly supported for years expanded its focus. What had once been a general charitable initiative became something more specific, more intentional. Programs were developed to support domestic workers, caregivers, and individuals in positions often overlooked or undervalued. Legal protections, access to health care, educational opportunities, support systems that hadn't existed before, and at the center of that shift was a realization. That value didn't come from position. It came from action, from character, from truth. Hannah didn't ask for any of it, didn't expect recognition, didn't seek involvement. But Khalid made one decision clear. "You should return to school," he told her one evening. They sat in the same small room where they had first spoken after everything changed. Ethan slept nearby. Peacefully, Hannah looked at him. "I don't know if that's possible," she said. "It is," Khalid replied. "If you want it to be." She hesitated. "Things are different now," she said. "I have responsibilities here." Khalid nodded. "And you'll keep them," he said. "But that doesn't mean you stop building your future." Hannah looked down, thinking, because for so long, that future had felt out of reach, something she had lost, something she had accepted as gone. "You were meant to be a nurse," Khalid continued. That hasn't changed. Hannah's voice softened. I'm not sure the system will let me back in. Khalid met her gaze. Then we'll change the system. The words weren't dramatic. They weren't meant to impress. They were simply true. Hannah exhaled slowly, and for the first time, she allowed herself to consider it, not as a possibility, but as something real. I'll think about it, she said. Khalid nodded. That's all I'm asking. Time moved forward, and with it, so did they. Ethan grew stronger, more confident, more open. Hannah found herself balancing two worlds, caring for him, and slowly stepping back into the path she had once lost. And Khalid, for the first time in years, learned how to be present without control, to lead without distance, to trust without fear. One evening, as the sun set across the horizon, casting long shadows across the estate, the three of them stood together in the garden. No staff, no expectations, no pressure, just a moment. Ethan reached for Hannah's hand, then for Khalid's, pulling them closer, without hesitation, without doubt, and in that simple gesture, something formed, not defined, not labeled, but real. A connection that had been built not through status, but through truth. And for the first time, it felt like something worth holding on to. The ballroom was quieter than it had been weeks ago, not because fewer people were there, but because the tone had changed. The same kind of guests filled the space: investors, executives, philanthropists, people accustomed to influence and control. The same chandeliers cast their warm light across polished floors. The same soft music played in the background. But something was different, subtle, yet unmistakable. Because this time, the room wasn't built to impress. It was built to reveal. Khalid al-Mansouri stood near the center of the room, speaking quietly with a small group of board members. His posture was the same, controlled, composed. But there was a difference in the way he held himself now. Less distant, more present, more aware. The event had been announced as a foundation expansion, an initiative focused on worker protection, healthcare access, and education for those often overlooked in the system. But the real purpose was something deeper. Across the room, Hannah Brooks stood near one of the side tables, her hands lightly clasped in front of her. She wore a simple dress, elegant but understated. Nothing about her appearance demanded attention. And yet, people noticed. Not because she tried to be seen, but because she no longer looked like someone trying to disappear. A few guests approached her throughout the evening. Some curious, some respectful, some unsure of how to speak to her now. "You're the one Khalid mentioned," one woman said gently. Hannah smiled politely. "I'm just helping where I can," she replied. The answer was simple, honest. And somehow, that made it more powerful than anything else being said in the room. Ethan stood nearby, holding onto her hand. He had grown more comfortable in spaces like this, though he still stayed close, still grounded himself through connection. He looked around the room quietly, observing, just as he always had. But there was something new in his expression now. Confidence. Not loud, not overwhelming, but real. Khalid noticed it from across the room. Not just the way Ethan stood, but the way he stayed near Hannah, the way his presence shifted when she was there. And for a moment, everything else faded. The business, the conversations, the expectations, all of it. Because what mattered was right there, visible, uncomplicated, true. A member of the board stepped forward, clearing his throat slightly. "It's time," he said. Khalid nodded. He moved toward the front of the room, the subtle shift in energy signaling to the guests that something was about to begin. Conversations quieted. Glasses lowered. Attention focused. Khalid stood at the podium. For a second, he said nothing. He looked out across the room, at the people who had come, at the faces that had once represented power, control, influence, and now something else. An opportunity. "To everyone here tonight," he began, his voice calm, steady, "thank you for being part of this." No elaborate introduction, no extended formalities, just truth. "We've spent years building systems designed to create success," he continued, "to manage risk, to protect investment." A few nods, quiet agreement. "That work matters," Khalid said, "but it's incomplete." The shift in tone was subtle, but intentional. "Because success without understanding—" He paused briefly. "Fragile." The room listened, carefully now. "Several weeks ago," he continued, "something happened in this house that forced me to reconsider everything I thought I understood about value." Hannah stood still. Ethan's hand tightened slightly around hers. Khalid's gaze moved across the room, then settled on her. "There was an incident," he said. "A mistake, something small by most standards." A few guests exchanged glances. Some remembered, some didn't. "But what followed," Khalid continued, "revealed something far more important than the mistake itself." His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "People showed who they were," he said. "Not when things were controlled, but when they weren't." Silence. Focused. Intentional. "And in that moment," Khalid added, "one person stood apart." He stepped away from the podium, not dramatically, not for effect, but simply moving closer toward Hannah. The room followed his movement, every eye shifting, every thought adjusting. "Hannah Brooks," he said. Her name carried through the room. Clear. Unavoidable. Hannah's breath caught slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what was happening. "She didn't seek attention," Khalid continued. "She didn't try to impress anyone. She didn't align herself with power." He paused. "She chose to care." The words landed. Because they were simple, though. Because they were true. "And in doing so," he added, "she revealed something this entire system had missed." Khalid turned slightly, addressing the room again. "That value is not determined by position," he said. "It's revealed through action." A few people lowered their gaze. Others stood still, listening, processing. Khalid's voice softened. "But the truth is," he continued, "this isn't just about one person." He looked back at Hannah, then at Ethan, then out across the room. "It's about how quickly we decide who matters and who doesn't," he said. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was reflective. Because everyone in that room, at some point, had made that decision, without realizing it, without questioning it. Khalid stepped back slightly, returning to the podium. "But it can change," he said, and for the first time that night. There was something else in his voice. Not control, not authority, but belief. "The programs we're launching tonight are designed to do exactly that," he continued. "To protect, to support, to give opportunity where it's been denied." He paused, then added, "Not because it's charity." Another pause. but because it's necessary. The room remained quiet, not out of obligation, but out of understanding. Khalid stepped away from the podium. The speech wasn't long. It didn't need to be, because the message had already been delivered. Clearly, completely. Ethan tugged gently on Hannah's hand. She looked down. He looked up at her. Then, without hesitation, he stepped forward, walking toward Khalid. The movement was small, but it drew attention. Khalid looked down as Ethan reached him, and then Ethan turned, reaching back for Hannah, pulling her forward, into the same space, the same moment, the same truth. The room watched, not with judgment, not with expectation, but with something new, understanding, because in that simple gesture, everything Khalid had said became real, visible, unmistakable. A child, a woman, a man, connected not by status, but by something far more important: trust. And in that moment, no one needed to be told the lesson, because they were already seeing it. True character is never defined by wealth, status, or appearance. It reveals itself in the quiet moments, when no one is watching, when there is nothing to gain and everything to risk. Hannah didn't act for recognition. She acted because it was right. And in the end, that made all the difference. Because kindness is never wasted, and the people we overlook may be the ones who change everything. If this story moved you, share where you're watching from and what time it is there. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us what truly matters.